The admonition I gave to people when thinking about this papacy, the papacy of Pope Leo the 14th, was we will know with the appointments. There will be other signs, of course, how he handles certain hot button topics, the things he says in addresses, and all these kind of things. And some of them have been very good. Some of them have, frankly, not been so good. And now we have appointments that have been made, and they give a lot away. So I'm going to go here first to, I'm only highlighting two. I'm not going to talk so much about the one in the United States. There was a Vietnamese bishop made the local ordinary in San Diego. He wears that cross that Pope Francis wears or wore, and it's usually any bishop you see wearing them. It's almost advertising that they're not one of the better ones. You never typically see a traditionally minded or very conservative bishop wearing the pectoral cross that Pope Francis wore. I'm not going to spend much time on him. Instead, I'm going to go here to swissinfo.ch. Translated headline: Pope Leo XIV approved Bishop of St. Gallen elected. Now, they have a weird system in Switzerland where the locals somehow choose who their bishop is going to be, but then the Pope has to agree or not. He gets a final say. Also, in my experience in the years of covering these kinds of things, the bishops who tend to dress like this are usually not among the better ones either. This is the new Bishop of St. Gallen, Switzerland. His name is Beat Grogli, and he is a synodalist, to put it mildly. He is a true blue Bergoglian. Just going to go over the details from this article. I accept this new great task with joy and respect, and thank everyone who has encouraged and supported me on my path so far, said the new bishop shortly after the election. Grogli previously headed the cathedral parish and was involved in pastoral care throughout the city of St. Gallen as a pastor of the pastoral care unit in the center and as dean. He was chosen from a list of 6 candidates compiled by the cathedral chapter, committee of 13 clergy, in autumn 2024. The list was then sent to Rome and checked there. On Tuesday, the Parliament of the Catholic denomination of the Canton of St. Gallen was also able to comment on the candidates. They have a process here that sounds suspiciously like what the Germans want in their synodal way, except they want it to be the laity to have more say than they have here in Switzerland. But the laity and the priests have a say on who their bishop is going to be. That is an inversion of the hierarchical nature of the church. It says, after the election on Tuesday afternoon, the result remained secret for a while. It first had to be approved by the new Pope, Leo XIV. This took place during the course of Wednesday. The name of the new bishop could therefore only be announced on Thursday lunchtime. The cathedral bells rang at the same time as the announcement at noon. So it doesn't give you a lot of details here on who this bishop is, but I did a little digging. He has expressed an admiration for Pope Leo XIV's emphasis on a synodal church, which prioritizes, apparently, dialogue, collaboration, and inclusivity within the church. In the bishop's first statement after his election, he highlighted the importance of the church being synodal, reflecting a theological leaning towards Pope Francis and Leo XIV's vision of a participatory church that involves laity and clergy in decision-making. Go back to how he became bishop in the first place. The priests voted for him, and then the local laity got to weigh in heavily as well. Now, his episcopal motto is Latin for "in the harmony of Christ," and it emphasizes unity, communion, and a pastoral approach rooted in the heart of Christ. He connects his motto to the Swiss model of concordance, suggesting a preference for fostering unity and collaboration over division, which aligns with what we are told synodality and all the inclusive ecclesiology represents. He has a pastoral and people-centered approach. Does this sound familiar? It should. This is all right out of Pope Francis's playbook. He has articulated a desire to be close to the people and connected to the universal church. This indicates a pastoral theology, he would say, that prioritizes accessibility, humility, and engagement with the faithful, while apparently somehow maintaining fidelity to the global church. His long-standing role in the pastoral care in St. Gallen, particularly the city's central pastoral unit, suggests he has a focus on practical, community-oriented ministry. He has been described by people as a trusted figure among both clergy and laity, pointing to his theology that values relational and incarnational ministry. This is again right out of Pope Francis. He has a reformist tendency. He spoke in favor of further reforms of the Roman Catholic Church in his first words after election. He has very much a progressive inclination, particularly open to changes in church practice or structures, though apparently not to doctrine. Go back to Fiducia Supplicans, the Pope Francis's infamous document on James Martin's sin and those who self-identify with that sin. It opens with a reiteration of church teaching, and then it instructs bishops to violate the church teaching in practice while paying lip service to the doctrine. This is the kind of thing this bishop is really into. He stated in a diocesan questionnaire, quote, that the ordained ministry can no longer be solely a male concern, saying bluntly that he's open to discussion about women's roles in the church, such as ordaining women to the diaconate or other leadership roles. His statement is, though, vague, of course, and it should be, of course, treated with maybe a touch of a grain of salt until he starts speaking the way bishops always inevitably do. So that's your first of his questionable ones. I'm going to go now over the one that kind of lit the internet up yesterday because it was inevitably going to. Diane Montagna posted this on X. In his first curial appointment, Pope Leo XIV has named Sister Tiziana Merletti, former Superior General of the Franciscan Sisters of the Poor, as Secretary of the Dicastery for Institutes of Consecrated Life and Societies of Apostolic Life. She will serve under Sister Simona Brambilla, who was named its prefect. They called her prefectress. That's a new one. That's never been given before, as far as I can tell. But she was named prefectress in January 2025 and is the first woman to lead a Vatican dicastery. So this is the secretary. You now have two women leading a Vatican dicastery. Hillary White, if you're familiar with her, frequent writer in the past at 1 Peter 5 and pretty active blogger and good observer on things in Rome. This is what the religious order looked like that this sister was running. That's what we call vitality now in the new church, right? There are some details here from the Catholic News Agency, though, that goes over this, and we'll talk about this, as well as something I found when doing a little digging, in that she has some very synodalist views on how the church should be run and religious should be run, but also how this actually violates the things Pope Leo XIII said on the role of women in family. And we can always remember the church, the language in describing the relationship of everybody in the church has always been discussed in terms of family, very hierarchical and patriarchal in nature. Here we go to Catholic News Agency headline: Pope Leo XIV appoints nun as Secretary of Dicastery for Institutes of Consecrated Life. Just go over this here, not the whole article, obviously, but again, this is one of those that some people will say, well, what's the big deal? And remember that we're talking here about the drip, drip, drip effect, the slow dripping of modernist understandings of ecclesiology in the practical life of the church. And religious don't get a lot of attention, especially women religious, because they tend to exist in isolation away from everybody else. And over the years, I've documented how more modernist religious orders try to essentially either destroy or put in total shackles the traditionalist convents. And by traditionalist, I don't necessarily mean dedicated to the traditional mass. They just understand their vocation in the same way that their foundresses did centuries or millennia earlier. And they try to live in accordance with that understanding. And they get dubbed rigid and schismatic for it, ultimately leading often to their bishops, with the help of Rome, trying to crush their orders. I'm not going to see anything different here. The article, quote, Pope Leo XIV has appointed Sister Tiziana Merletti as Secretary for the Dicastery for Institutes of Consecrated Life and Societies of Apostolic Life. According to the Vatican Press Office, the 66-year-old consecrated religious previously served as Superior General of the Franciscan Sisters of the Poor for 9 years. She will report directly to another nun, Sister Simona Brambilla, whom Pope Francis appointed in January as prefect of the Vatican department responsible for all matters concerning the government, discipline, studies, assets, rights, and privileges of institutes of consecrated life. When they say institutes of consecrated life, that's not just nuns. It's also monks. And we're talking about monks and consecrated men, you're also talking about priests. So you have here a nun, two nuns, who are in charge of ordained men. The church never allowed this in the history of the church. Never. Under the late Argentine pontiff, women's leadership increased significantly. According to data maintained by the Vatican on its website, the female presence increased from almost 19.2% to 23.4% during Francis's pontificate. With a 2022 Apostolic Constitution Predicate Evangelium, Francis decreed that lay people, in addition to women, could lead a dicastery and become prefects, a position previously reserved for cardinals and archbishops. And as I reported during the conclave, there were some who were very much Bergoglians who shredded Francis at the open congregations for this, who said that he had gone too far putting lay people in charge of Vatican dicasteries. And when they say lay people, they often throw in religious as well with that. And again, you will not find this in the history of the church until the modern era. Both Sister Brambilla and Sister Merletti will have authority over ordained clergy. Laity having authority over the ordained in matters of the church is a perversion of the laws of the church. And with it being women having this authority, it's considered a greater twisting of the natural order of things. We'll go to the Big Modernism Substack to have a look at a pretty good take on this, honestly. Many even won't like this headline, but here we go. Leo's feminized Vatican, where nuns rule priests. Leo XIV completes the revolution Francis began, and Rome no longer hides its inversion of sacred hierarchy. Some people are going to speak a lot more bluntly about this. I will continue to take a measured response because next week we might get Cardinal Burke running the dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, or Bishop Schneider given a promotion to run the offices of the liturgy, or put in charge of Opus Dei, the FSSP, and the SSPX for all we know. Right now, the appointments all lean in one direction. A continuation of Pope Francis's program, which the Holy Father has said repeatedly he was going to do. He said it on camera numerous times, and in press releases numerous times, that he is there to continue Pope Francis's reforms. And some of us thought that might mean a reform of the Vatican Bank and other things that weren't as high profile, even though they should have been. But with these appointments, we see what the people who were less open to giving him a chance were willing to say was correct. Here's what Mr. Chris Jackson has to say. Quote, Pope Leo XIV's early papacy has confirmed what faithful Catholics feared. The soft traditionalism of his vestments is a veil for the continuation and now the consolidation of the revolution begun at Vatican II. Nowhere is this clearer than in his appointment to the Dicastery for Institutes of Consecrated Life and Societies of Apostolic Life, where both the prefect, Sister Simona Brambilla, and now the secretary, Sister Tiziana Merletti, are women religious. For the first time in church history, a Roman dicastery with jurisdiction over male clergy is governed entirely by women. This is a continuation of a radical, public, and systematic rupture with Catholic theology. Traditionally, roles of ecclesiastical governance, especially over clergy, have been tied to the sacrament of holy orders, a priestly character men alone may receive. The Church has always taught that only those who share in the ministerial priesthood possess the authority to govern in the name of Christ. The 1917 Code of Canon Law barred laymen and women alike from exercising jurisdiction over clergy. Even after the 1983 revision, which softened some restrictions, the tradition remained that major governance roles in the Roman Curia were reserved for ordained men. For centuries, this wasn't debated. It was simply understood. Christ did not institute a church where women govern priests. And then he goes here to Leo XIII. Remember, everyone keeps comparing Leo XIV to Leo XIII because of the Catholic social teaching angle. Quote, Pope Leo XIII in his writings and magisterial acts consistently upheld the divine structure of the Church. He taught that governance flowed from the sacrament of orders and that the Church has no authority to change what Christ himself instituted. John Paul II reaffirmed this doctrinal limit in Ordinatio Sacerdotalis. The Church has no authority whatsoever to confer priestly ordination on women, and this judgment is to be definitively held by all the faithful. What flows from this is obvious. If women cannot be priests, then they cannot lawfully govern those who are. To suggest otherwise is not a theological novelty, but a betrayal of divine constitution. And yet under Leo XIV, two religious sisters now rule over entire congregations of male clergy and religious superiors. And he goes on to talk about how this is all managed, how this is, well, we'll go over just a little bit more. And then go back to that sister and what she has to say. He says, this is not merely about roles or functions. It is about the identity of the church itself. The true church is hierarchical, patriarchal, and sacramental because Christ made her so. But the new religion, the conciliar church that now occupies Rome, rejects this. It replaces fatherhood with management, hierarchy with synodality, and priestly authority with sentimental egalitarianism. And you know what? He's 100% right. This has been the problem going back decades. The church continues to look to the secular world for ways to govern itself. It's all right there. It is not an accident that both Brambilla and Merletti come from bureaucratic, canon law heavy backgrounds. This is about converting the church into a technocratic apparatus, where sacramental character means nothing and one's identity as a woman is a qualification for governance, not a theological limitation. End quote. Hard for some people to accept. But again, where's the lie? This is what we've seen so far. I say that knowing full well that maybe next week, Cardinal Fernandez may get kicked to the curb and replaced by Cardinal Burke or something. Not that I think that that's highly likely, given what we've seen so far. Now, Sister Merletti published a document of governance of religious institutions. No, I'm not going to read the full thing. It's a very much a dry academic document. But instead, here's a summary. And I have a link to it in my show notes at returntotradition.org. Shortly after this live stream is over, you'll be able to see it for yourself if you want to read it. The document, Government as Praxis, by Tiziana Merletti, explores the concept of governance within religious communities. It emphasizes a spiritual and communal approach to leadership. She outlines the role of superiors in fostering unity, promoting the common good, and nurturing the spiritual and human growth of members. Governance is presented as a service rooted in love, humility, and discernment, guided by the charism of the congregation. The text highlights practical aspects, such as the decision-making processes, the importance of dialogue, and the balance between authority and collaboration. It stresses that effective governance aligns with the mission of the community and requires ongoing formation, accountability, and adaptability to changing contexts. On a surface level, that sounds fine, right? The problem is, that sounds like something you would find in the governing dockets in the mission or vision statement of your local parks department in your town. That's what that sounds like. It sounds like the water district, how it runs things. What it doesn't sound like is an institution of the Catholic Church, which is hierarchical and patriarchal by definition, right into its DNA, given that structure by Jesus Christ himself. We're not talking about democracy here. If this was the document she had written on how your local assessor's office, those guys who go around and find out how much your house is really worth so they can tax you on it, if she had written this as how the assessor's office should interact with the community, nobody would care at all. This is about how religious should be governed. And in this looms large a document called Cor Orans, a document issued during Pope Francis's term in 2018 that fundamentally changed how religious organizations were ruled, at least women's religious. And they invoked this language and then crushed traditional religious orders, especially those of nuns. Something I've covered ad nauseum on this channel for like 5 years now. I can't even come up with the number of different religious orders that were conservative Novus Ordo, even just moderate Novus Ordo. They understood what it was their foundresses were doing and tried to live that while still being kind of in the spirit of Vatican II. On one side of the spectrum, all the way to your hardline traditionalist ones who lived in convents without electricity, kept the traditional forms of the sacraments, including the Mass, and were spent all day either working to support their parishes or their communities or in prayer and interacted with the world very little. Both sides of the women's religious spectrum. And they were all crushed and had their property seized by Rome and the local bishops working together, governed through a document invoking this kind of language. This kind of language used as a cudgel to get them to modernize and liberalize and ditch their traditional vestments, and well, not vestments, but their traditional habits, and adopt a more modern outward approach. There's some more about that document. The document reflects a blend of traditional and reformist approaches to governance in religious communities, with notable alignment to the reformist perspective associated with Pope Francis. I put this together verbatim. I wanted to get this right. So It emphasizes the role of spiritual superiors as spiritual leaders who foster unity in the common good, rooted in the charism of the congregation. Well, remember something here. Fostering unity in the common good sounds great until you identify people who you think are threats to that and then go after them with brute force using the laws and governing documents of the church that way. Like, for instance, against traditionalist groups who want to keep the, say, Benedictines or the Augustinians or whatever it is, looking and acting and living the same way that they were founded to do millennia ago. Her approach reflects a traditional understanding of governance in religious communities, in theory, where authority is exercised in the service of the community's mission and spiritual growth. And, she says a lot about humility, discernment, and accountability, while also marrying it to the reformist tendencies, which resonate with Pope Francis's vision of governance, particularly an emphasis in dialogue, collaboration, and adaptability to modern contexts. This is the woman who's going to be helping another woman rule over women religious and male religious, including priests. The call for ongoing formation and leadership style marked by love, service, and communal discernment mirrors Pope Francis's advocacy for a synodal, inclusive church that prioritizes listening and shared responsibility. Listening, of course, always to select groups. That's what synodality came to mean in practice. She is the embodiment of the modernist reform of religious life that has left religious communities absolutely bereft of vocations, as most of them pursue worldly pursuits like secular conceptions of social justice instead of spiritual growth and fostering a cloistered prayer life. Now, Pope Leo XIII, in a document called Arcanum, goes so far as to decry the influence of the state in secular culture and church affairs. Here he's talking explicitly about marriage and relations within the matrimonial state, but you can easily and justly apply this to attempts to apply the logic of secularism to the church itself. And synodality is just the latest version of trying to rebrand the church in a secular way. So we'll go here to Arcanum. Short excerpt from it. I think I have the full text of this on my channel. If not, I will fix that in the next couple of weeks. Remember what we said earlier about the church always using the language of family often to describe how it's governed, because families were also patriarchal and hierarchical in nature, weren't democratic. Same here with the church. Quote, "Now, since the family and human society at large spring from marriage, these men will on no account allow matrimony to be the subject of the jurisdiction of the church." Here he's talking about revolutionary men. "Nay, they endeavor to deprive it of all holiness, and so bring it within the contracted sphere of those rights which, having been instituted by man, are ruled and administered by the civil jurisdiction or jurisprudence of the community. Wherefore it necessarily follows that they attribute all power over marriage to civil rulers, and allow none whatever to the church. And when the church exercises any such power, they think that she acts either by favor of the civil authority or to its injury. Now is the time, they say, for the heads of the state to vindicate their rights unflinchingly, and to do their best to settle all that relates to marriage according as to them seems good. Hence our own civil marriages, commonly so called, whence laws are framed which impose impediments to marriage. Hence arise judicial sentences affecting the marriage contract, as to whether or not it have been rightly made. Lastly, all power of prescribing and passing judgment in this class of cases is, as we see, of set purpose denied to the Catholic Church, so that no regard is paid either to her divine power or to her prudent laws. Yet under these, for so many centuries, have the nations lived on whom the light of civilization shone bright with the wisdom of Jesus Christ." And that sounds like he's talking a lot about marriage and allowing the secular world, allowing Caesar to have the control over the sacrament. And it sort of is. But this is a decrying of the actual influence of secular culture in the affairs of the church more broadly. Leo XIII is talking explicitly about marriage and relations within the matrimonial state. We can easily apply this justly to the attempts to apply the logic of secularism to the church itself. And synodality is just that latest version of that. That language that you heard from my summary of her document is right out of managerial documents for your local governments. That's what it is. They're applying that to religious life. It's absolutely nutty. Again, these aren't the only appointments he's made. We also had an appointment to the Archdiocese of San Diego, where an actual like rocket scientist was appointed here to be the bishop. Fine. Except he wears Pope Francis's pectoral cross. And we go look a little bit into him, you find out he's all fully on board with synodality too. But of course he would be. Who was in San Diego recently? Cardinal Robert McElroy, who is now the Cardinal Archbishop of Washington, D.C. These are the appointments that people will need to be paying attention to. And I say that with a caveat that next week maybe we'll get some good ones. We will all wait and see. But so far the appointments all point in one direction, and it's not a good one either. And no, for those who may not have heard, who think that it actually happened, Cardinal Robert Serra did not get appointed to anything by the Holy Father. That did not happen. It was fake news. Spread by some of the fake AI YouTube channels like Pope Leo XIV Words and Pope Leo XIV Sermons. Those are fake channels promoting fake homilies using AI. The people running those channels are committing grave sin by putting words into the Holy Father's mouth and making it look like he's saying things that he never said. And yes, they have been reported to YouTube because it is actually an overt violation of the terms of service to do such things. If you find more AI channels like that doing these things, email me links to their videos. The email address is in the description box below. I have no qualms, even if increasingly I am not, generally liking the direction this new papacy is going in. I am still not going to tolerate at all people literally fabricating words and having him say things that he never actually said. It is a grave sin. It's evil and should be treated as such. Now, that's not the only scandalous thing that happened in the last few days. Go to LifeSite News. Got to be careful with this one. Headline: Pro-sacrifice of Moloch. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney appears to receive communion at Pope Leo's inaugural Mass. He is seen with his arms outstretched about to receive Holy Communion at the inaugural Mass of Pope Leo XIV, despite his fervent support of the sacrifice to Moloch and all things James Martin. And now there are going to be people who will say, well, we don't know that the Holy Father knew who he was or who he was there. That's nonsense. That is nonsense. There are people who handle every little detail that happens anytime the Holy Father is involved, who know who the people are going to be in attendance. And if there's anybody of any note, the Holy Father will be notified. Has to be, to avoid public scandal and to avoid causing problems for him. Let me give you let's take the politician out of this. What do you think would happen if Taylor Marshall went to the inaugural Mass of Pope Leo XIV? Do you think they would have taken note of him? Yes, they would have. Without question, they would have. This isn't 2015 anymore, right? They know the media landscape. They know who Mark Carney is. This reminds me of 2022, I think it was. Remember when Archbishop Corleone of San Francisco was in his public battle with Nancy Pelosi, Lady Moloch, as I called her, because that's what she is. She's a servant of that demon. He basically told her not to receive Holy Communion, an order which is not only in force in his diocese, but is in force. It's an injunction against the person who receives the injunction anywhere they go in the church. And about a week later, when she was having these debates, a week or two later, back and forth between them going on in the press, she was filmed in Rome going to Mass and receiving Holy Communion at a papal Mass. They know who these people are. They have to know. It would be utterly irresponsible of the Swiss Guard not to let the Holy Father know who is attending his Masses if they are a person of note. They will know. So Mark Carney created a public scandal. Again, this is not about, Canadian politics. This isn't nothing else. If this was, I don't know, name an American Catholic who supports all these evil things, you can name it easily, not John Kerry. He's one who's been involved in this before. We'd be talking about it the same way. We just talk about John Kerry, not Mark Carney. This is not America versus Canada. This is the fact that a man who publicly supports and endorses gravely evil, condemned things in violation of church teaching, putting his own soul and the souls of all those who support him at risk when he does these things. Here are the details. Generally evil man, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney appeared to receive communion at the inaugural Mass of Pope Leo XIV on Sunday. An image posted online shows Carney at the Mass with his arms outstretched in front of a cleric holding up the Eucharist. There he is. That's Mark Carney. And there is a priest holding up the Eucharist. At least he didn't receive it from the Holy Father directly. Carney's office said that he met with the Pope after the Mass and thanked him for his message of unity, compassion, and peace. He said that he absolutely and unreservedly supports the sacrifice to Moloch and promised to defend it proudly and consistently, despite his self-identification as Catholic. His election platform vowed to protect Canada's unlimited access to that evil practice and ensure permanent public support funding of it. The platform also promised to use taxpayer money to establish a new IVF program so that so-called James Martin types can obtain kids. Kearney has additionally described making people who are deluded into thinking they can change the reality of the flesh procedures for the most young. Again, evil man as a fundamental right, among other pro-James Martin stances, including his support for their parody of holy matrimony. And it goes on and on and on. The Canadian Bishops' Conference head, Bishop William McGrattan, last month said that he should not be denied Holy Communion. So there's the state of your Canadian bishops, which surprised nobody who's familiar with the state of the bishops of Canada and the church in Canada. That should surprise nobody. This all the way goes back to the Winnipeg statement, which I believe was in Winnipeg. If I'm wrong about it being Winnipeg, let me know. But back after Humanae Vitae was issued by Paul VI, the Canadian bishops put together this document that said, oh, that's just a guideline. Don't worry, Catholics in Canada. You don't have to listen to this. You can go ahead and use contraception if you want to. Okay. So this is not a new problem. This is why whenever I say Francis wasn't the problem, this has been an institutionalized problem for 60 years or longer, is a lot of these bishops don't have the faith. They simply don't. We don't need to play nice about it anymore. Yeah, Base Observer, it was Winnipeg. Yeah, I thought so. I keep meaning to do a video on the Winnipeg statement. I should probably go find it and just finally do it. I'm curious what you're thinking about this, because I am going to continue with we'll see what happens. Remember, I said this yesterday in my live stream, if you didn't see it, when I had Anthony of Avoiding Babylon on, who might be in the live chat right now for all I know, but that it looks like it's a John Paul II, Pope Francis hybrid papacy. We'll see. Right now, it's leaning heavily towards the Pope Francis part. But I'm curious what you think about this. Edgardo says, I don't know anything. Well, that's fine. Don't care. I'm just curious what people generally think about this, because are you surprised at all by these kinds of appointments to the to various bishops' conferences and to various dicasteries? Hold on. AKC says, it looks like mine and Joe's reaction to Prevost's election is perfectly appropriate. I don't know. I still think I could have reined it in a little bit that day. And Dag says, I'm telling you, Anthony, he'll be sure to give traditionalists crumbs of hope. Quite possibly. Quite possibly. All right, folks. Pray for the Holy Father every day. It's your duty to do so. It could be that he is a full-throated believer. There's evidence of that. It could be that there are people whispering in his ear. It's probably happening. That probably happens under the best papacies. People whispering in the Pope's ear, giving bad advice. Pray for him and pray for the church. Traditionalist Catholic says, what if the Holy Father continues Bergoglio appointments in the American hierarchy? Well, it looks like that's what happened. We'll see. Not a lot is known about the new bishop of San Diego, but we'll see. We're going to find out. Last year, I did a video on my channel here about the huge number of openings in the dioceses. The whole host of bishops who are past retirement age, who Francis kept on because they didn't have anybody who wanted to be a bishop or who didn't fit his vision of it. And we know that last year, after the election, there was a meeting between Cardinal Cupich, Cardinal McElroy, and I think it was Cardinal Tobin with Pope Francis in the Vatican. And that was when McElroy, just days later, was announced as the Cardinal Archbishop of Washington, D.C. And then you started getting some appointments in the United States. And they were all Bergoglians, every one of them. All right, folks. We know what you think about all this in the comments, please. Sources will be at returntotradition.org here just in a few moments after this live stream. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.